Hey, I'm Nate from Christchurch, Montevideo, and where I'm from, we have a proverb. Don't make mountains out of molehills. It basically just means don't make a bigger deal out of things that aren't that big of a deal. Don't treat a minor difficulty like a huge crisis. And the origin is clear. A mole makes a pile of dirt as it tunnels into the ground, and that's hardly comparable to a mighty, solid mountain. But we humans, we can tend to make a bigger deal of ourselves than we really are. The people who have promoted their image and made a name for themselves usually think pretty highly of what they've built. A different perspective, though, would show that compared to God, all they've managed to do is pile up a little dirt as they dig into a hole. Well, today I want to look into how you and I often choose our molehills over God's mighty mountains. We promote our image and make a name for ourselves the way we like, but at the end of our lives, what do we have to show for it? Could there be something more? Well, if you hike through the pages of the Bible and you stop to think about it, you realize there's a ton of talk of mountains. There are a ton of mountain names to keep track of. And there's actually almost 500 mentions of mount or mountain in the Bible, and 700 if you include hill. And if you're looking for mountains throughout the Bible, you'll realize that a lot of the most significant events happen on or around them. There are incredible encounters with God, encounters that have significance across the pages of the Bible, because mountains are also used as this symbolic theme throughout all the scripture. So we can see God in his literary genius sometimes pitting two mountains against each other with similarities and contrasts. So in this series, we want to just select a few of those mountain pairs, the most significant mountain pairs in Scripture. We'll be telling the incredible stories of earth-shaking events that happened there, and also how God used them to connect deeper concepts and communicate greater meanings, which we'll find are incredibly relevant to you and me right now. But today I want to go all the way back to the beginning. The first pages of the Bible describe to us a garden, which in other parts seems to be associated with the Mount of God. As it says, 4 rivers flow down from it, 2 of them being the Tigris and the Euphrates. And as mountains would be throughout the biblical history, this mountainous highland garden was a place to connect heaven and earth. It was a place for people to connect with God. And if you're familiar with the story, you'll recall that after God created the earth and created all the animals, he designed humans uniquely in his image to form a special partnership with him. And this partnership included the privilege of unique relationship with him and a purpose with a unique responsibility as his trusted governors. You may have heard it said really well in the Westminster Confession that man's chief purpose is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And that's exactly what we see started in Genesis. And God says he wants humanity in this unique relationship so that we can enjoy him like we would do hanging out with a grandpa or a good friend that we have the privilege of loving. And he said he wants humanity to have this unique purpose with a responsibility to create life and build families, to work on his behalf, to take care of this earth on his behalf, and to accomplish great things with the earth's resources on his behalf. All of this glorifies God. In other words, it promotes his image and makes his name great the way that he likes. Now, that sounds pretty lovely, But have you ever cringed at a video of a girlfriend saying no to a public marriage proposal? Now, you can go find those videos on YouTube, but I warn you, it's brutal. Well, that's how the first humans rather impolitely rejected the proposed relationship with God. And they took one look at the purposeful responsibility he offered them and rebelled. Like a kid that prefers a tantrum-earned timeout over cleaning his room. Now, we as modern readers can trivialize the eating of a fruit, but it had to do with way more than that. If you remember, this tree was the opportunity to reject and rebel against God's thing and God's way and God's image, with the hope of promoting their image and making their name great the way that they liked. Since then, when we live contrary to God's design and desire for us, we rather ironically and tragically trade God's mighty mountain for our little molehill, our little pile of dirt that we made as we dig ourselves a deeper hole. But this filthy rejection of his proposal caused God to realize that it was necessary for a breakup. So he expelled those first humans from his mountain, the close relationship severed, and now our purpose in life much harder to find with the toughness of this cursed earth. But in God's grace, he sacrificed an animal to clothe them, symbolizing his covering over their shame. And he made a promise. He said one day there would come a man who would destroy this curse for good and restore the relationship. But you keep reading Genesis and you realize it just goes downhill from there. It only takes us one generation to get to our first murder, and from there it says that people just got worse and worse. With this human nature that made evil our default, people rejected God so hard that it says he felt so deeply hurt and grieved that he had made them. So he wiped the earth clean with that famous flood to sort of start over. And that's where we get our very first mountain by name in Scripture, Mount Ararat. And our Armenian brothers and sisters at Christ Church can tell us all about that place. Because this is where the ark that God used to deliver those who loved him through the destruction landed on this famous peak. And on this mighty Ararat of salvation, God offered his relationship and responsibility once again to Noah and his family. He repeated that he wanted humanity in this unique purpose of partnering with him to create life, to build families, to work on his behalf, to take care of this world on his behalf, and to accomplish great things with the world's resources on his behalf. All of this glorifies God. In other words, it promotes his image. It makes his name great the way that he likes it. Now, even though God knew that there was no hope of anyone accomplishing this perfectly until that promised one would come, he was moved by grace. He was moved by Noah sacrificing an animal on Mount Ararat, which symbolized the covering of their shame, and he made yet another promise. Having hung up his warrior's bow, he said his watery justice was now completed and it wouldn't happen again on this earth where we all work. And if you turn the page, we see humanity migrating from Mount Ararat, that mighty mountain of God, representing salvation, to the plains. And there they try to build their own mountain, a synthetic man-made mountain. So the famous Tower of Babel was built by people who got together and decided that they were going to reject God's way of connecting heaven and earth and rebel against his purposeful responsibility that he'd given them. He wanted them to spread out and fill the earth. But they specifically said that they wanted to huddle together in a city and build a tower that would reach to the heavens so they could make a name for themselves instead of spreading out and filling the earth, which is what God wanted. Now, we as modern readers can trivialize the building of a tower to reach heaven, but it was about way more than that. It was the opportunity to reject and rebel against God's thing and God's way and God's image in the hopes of promoting their image and making their name great the way that they liked. Now, ever since then, when we live contrary to God's design and desire for us, we ironically and tragically trade God's mighty mountain for a little pile of bricks that we made. Something that I find interesting is that archaeologists have found this ancient Babylonian tablet that reveals the style of the structure that it lists as the Tower of Babel. Now, it would have been this Mesopotamian step pyramid called a ziggurat. Curiously, other Mesopotamian ziggurats were given names demonstrating that they too were meant to serve as staircases from earth to heaven, like the house of the link between heaven and earth found in modern-day Iraq. But if those people were hoping to have an encounter with God on this makeshift mountain, they got way more than they bargained for. Because in contrast with what happened on Mount Ararat, where God came down to bless, the account says that God came down to divide them by language so that they couldn't complete their project. And so God finally got what he wanted, that they would spread out and fill the earth. But isn't it interesting that all over the world we have this same pyramid style? Very similar all over the world in all kinds of cultures that had no contact with one another. Could it be possible that after migrating from their building project at Babel in Babylon, the different people groups gathered with their language groups to start building similar structures in their new lands, all trying to reach to heaven and make a name for themselves, to enjoy themselves and glorify themselves forever? Interestingly, we have the same heaven-reaching race going on in the cities of our world today. Every tallest skyscraper is soon displaced from the top of the list with a taller one. And they're seen as great images of achievement and superiority for a city or a nation. It's a symbol of how we can make a name for ourselves and promote our image. The problem is that when we're gone, if this is all there is, what good are our accomplishments? See, those elite world powers that built what are now ruins are no longer here, and we barely remember some of their names. Will we be remembered when we're gone? Or could there be something else that we're missing? Well, Eden, Ararat, the mighty mountains of God, represent the partnership that he wants with us. And that feebly built, man-made Tower of Babel represents our pride. You may remember that Jesus said, "Those who humble themselves will be exalted, and those who exalt themselves will be humbled." Now, in what ways do you think we do it our way to make a name for ourselves instead of promoting the image of God and making him famous? Why don't we accept his offer of relationship and purpose as we trust in that promised one who came to destroy the curse for good, Jesus? See, his sacrifice didn't cover over our shame. It washes it away completely. And unlike the Tower of Babel, the cross actually does bridge the gap between heaven and earth. So if we believe Jesus alone can make possible that relationship and purpose with God, and we commit to live under his kingship, then we do get to enjoy that satisfying life that he offers as we enjoy him and make him famous. Now, I personally want to get better at embracing the free ticket to God's mountain instead of just settling for my molehills. Now, let's just reflect for a couple minutes, and we'll see you next week.